那今天晚上呢，星期六晚上呢是 feature 我们的教育板块，教育板块呢是我们的 IvyCompass 指南针。那我们的指南针呢是致力于将北美口碑最好的，例如今天晚上的 John 前招生官，还有一些独立的升学顾问，还有一些艺术、音乐作品集的辅导，包括课程、AP、SAT、竞赛等辅导稀缺资源对接给我们全球的华人家庭。此外呢 IvyCompass 还提供定制化的志愿者机会、社会影响力、科研及实习等备竞项目。在2月底和3月初，我们会有一个社会影响力的一个项目，也欢迎到时候家长感兴趣的话，关注我们的微信群。Ellison 会把这些信息分享在我们的微信群里头。那同时，我们还提供一些背景提升的项目，像科研啦，还有实习啊。在全方位的把控升学服务的质量的同时呢，我们特别的着重培养、提升学生的软实力和领导力，帮助孩子在高中期间就获得这些导师们的指导的同时，让孩子们懂得如何是一个比较好的 business practice， 懂得如何回复邮件，懂得如何跟导师之间的沟通和连接所有资源，来帮助他获得一个全面的成长。所以我们常常说，升学它只是一个间接的水到渠成的一个结果，我们特别看重，也在积极的着重帮助孩子来打造他的个人品牌。那所以这个还是这个投资还是比我们一般的其他的这个升学要稍微多一点的这个考量在里头哈。那我们大家都在比较紧张的等待 RD 的结果，那目前已经收获的一些 ED 的结果，那几个比较大家熟知的学校都有我们学生的身影，包括 MIT 啊、普林斯顿、Cornell、杜克、CMU、Amherst。那么在 RD 还没有揭露之前，那可看到我们的导师已经送了一些不错的孩子，斩获了这一些比较很不错的 offer。那么还有一些孩子在静等他们这个 RD 的这个结果哈，然后静等我们的这些分享。如果您有机会去看我们的网站哈，那网站上面呢，我们就有在 video 那个地方来 hosting 以前历来的，跳的这么多，以前历来的一些视频，包括有 Jason Paul 的一些艺术辅导集，有 John 的历来的这个以往的一些分享，有 Demi，有这个背景提升，还有一些 SAT， 还有包括我们音乐导师李龙飞。和专业的这个写作导师 Ariane， 这些讲座分享都在我们的这个网站上面。如果您有机会想了解我们更多的这方面的以往的信息和知识的话，欢迎您去我们的网站观看。好，那这个是我们的官网，还有我们的这个地址。如果您感兴趣加入我们的微信公众号，关注我们的微信公众号，那请你扫码左边的这个二维码。如果你想进微信群，进一步跟随我们去探索每一个月的这个免费分享，那你就扫这个右手的这个小助手，我们就会把你加到我们的这个微信群里头。那今天晚上呢，就非常非常高兴，我觉得今天晚上内容极其的有价值，因为从外围来看，我们每一年都感觉这个录取的结果像一个黑匣子。不知道有的学生可能比我们孩子的这个成绩总体看来还不如我们孩子的成绩 GPA 高。那么为什么有些孩子被录取了？那为什么有些孩子呢？可能在您看到的一些零星顶点的这个信息当中，觉得这个孩子已经很优秀了，为什么没有被录取或者被 Defer 了？所以很多的信息我们不知道。所以今天晚上呢，我们专门邀请到 John。那 John 是Cornell 大学的前招生办主任他不是一个招生官，他是一个招生办主任。所以现在 Cornell 的很多的工作人员和一些招生官们都是他在那个时候做招生办主任的时候来培训和录用的所以对这个 Cornell 的这方面的这个信息，他是当然极其的熟悉。但是同时我也想指出，我们的导师不仅仅是因为coming from Cornell， 所以他只知道 Cornell， 但他其实对 UPenn 对耶鲁MIT 普林斯顿这个 Top 30 School、Top 50 School 都是相当熟悉的。所以有的时候家长在问我们，是不是这个导师只知道 某一个学校，不是这样的啊，因为他们都是这个一层的这个学校和一层的学生都会经常被导师们在这个辅导的过程当中是相当熟悉每个学校的它的一些这个录用的这个背后的原理都是类似的。那今天晚上John呢跟我们分享，就是在这个录取过程当中，这是招生官们到底在看什么？他们看到这个东西，哪些是吸引他们的，哪些是打动他们的？那又是哪些因素决定了这个学生会被录取？那么在 Defer 和 Waitlist 以后，还有什么补救方法没有？同时呢，他还会跟我们会分享讲一下这个 Chatgpt 是如何改变游戏规则的。那在John分享之前呢，我还跟大家做一个预告和广告哈，就是同一个月就是在2月17号周六，也是周六的晚上，我们会把John再邀请回来。因为有另外一个话题，现在越来越多的家长在咨询我们，所以我们觉得有必要让John来讲一下。现在手头上事实是我们有好几个在 transfer 的，也就是说，当录取结果不是特别好的时候，你已经孩子进入了大学，有的时候有的家长可能会特别有这个意愿啊，包括我们去年有个学生是进入Cornell以后，现在也在做这个 transfer，所以在2月17号呢，将会回来专门讲一场如何做 transfer 啊，就是进入了大学以后如何做 transfer 啊，所以欢迎您在2月17号再来参与到我们的这个分享当中。那么现在呢，我就invite John. John, you can come on screen and I finish introducing you. Also, I made a announcement for February the 17th. You are going to come back talk about transfer. Now tonight is all your show. And I'm sure everybody's very much excited and looking forward for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Much appreciated. Let me just share my screen here for just a moment.
Let me stop sharing.
Give me 1 second here. Okay. Can you see my screen, Sophia?
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
All right. Fantastic. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, thank you so much for coming to visit this evening and talking a little bit about...
Sorry, John, hold on 1 second. Somehow your screen was not like full screen, but showing notes and stuff.
Oh, is it? Okay, let me stop here. Let me stop the share real quick. Make sure I... Oh, yeah, was the wrong one. There we go. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining this evening. I'm looking forward to sharing some inside information about what happens behind the scenes in college admissions. As Sophia noted, I'm John Morganelli. My background obviously is in college admissions. Most recently, I was the director of admissions at Cornell for the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm the author of the book, Growing Ivy, How to Crack the Code on Elite College Admissions. This evening, what I want to do is provide some insight into what's happening behind the scenes. And hopefully, if you have a better understanding of what's happening behind the scenes, you'll be able to strategize and position yourself more effectively. Just a little bit about my background and my perspective. In addition to working at Cornell as the director of admissions and managing the final decisions for all of the applications to the college, I also worked at 2 additional U.S. universities in senior leadership positions. I was fortunate to be part of the Ivy Plus conference. If you're not familiar with what that is, every 2 years, the directors of admissions from each of the Ivy League schools, plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford, come together and they have an enrollment meeting. We hosted it in Ithaca, New York when I was at Cornell, and it was a great opportunity to get a sense for how the other institutions engage in enrollment management. I also have been frequently cited in national publications, most recently for the affirmative action decision in the New York Times, talking about the impact to the students that we support. And finally, I have a team that supports my efforts. I've coined them the Morganelli Method Counselors because the method that I employ is very specific, and everybody on my team has been trained under that method and has also been trained under the same method we used to train the readers at Cornell University when I was managing the operation there. Okay, so today we're going to talk about behind the scenes. And I want to start with what's happening behind the scenes before the student presses submit, right? So now we're talking at this stage of September, October, what's happening in the admissions offices during that period of time? Well, the first thing that's happening is they're reviewing, right? They're doing this over the summer, and now they're starting to make decisions about what happened last year. How big was the class? How many biology students did we have? How many Hispanic students did we have? How many students from North Dakota did we have? All those different questions about what the distribution of students looks like is going to be reviewed. And then, of course, depending upon where they had lots of students or where they had few students, that will impact the strategy of what the priorities will be. Oftentimes, the admissions office will make a recommendation for what those priorities should be, like we need more women in STEM, for example, or we need more philosophy majors. And then the board of trustees and the faculty will bless that priority list. That's part one, priorities. What do we need to change from last year to direct the readers to focus on this type of student? The second thing that happens is enrollment targets, right? So how many offers do we actually have to make this year in order to have the size class that we want? And that, again, is dependent upon how big was the transfer class? How many people transferred out of this institution? Did anybody fail out? What are all those different numbers that impact total enrollment? Those are going to be looked at, and that will be the indicator for the total accept number. How many offers are we going to make? Of course, if there are more offers than last year, that makes it a little easier. If there are less offers than last year, that will make it a little harder. The third thing we're doing at the college admissions office is editing the voter sheet or the evaluation sheet, whatever you want to call it. Those are the documents that the readers, the admissions officers or readers, use to evaluate students. And what they want to do is they want to make sure that that evaluation sheet or that voter sheet represents the priorities, right? So if we need women in STEM, for example, that needs to show up on the voter sheet so that the readers can read it and be consciously aware of the priority when they're going through the applications for admission. So the evaluation or voter sheets are being edited to reflect the priorities of the school. And they're also making seasonal reader assignments. What's a seasonal reader? A seasonal reader is an individual who helps the admissions office read applications, but they're not a full-time staff member. Most highly selective schools hire seasonal readers, and they're usually hired for about, I'd say, 6 to 20 weeks, depending on what school we're talking about. And the seasonal reader is someone who maybe has experience reading apps, maybe not. And their job really is to help filter through the huge sum of applications and help the admissions office focus their full-time staff and energy on people who are more likely to earn an offer. And then the final thing that's happening before you press submit that I would note would be regional assignments. The admissions offices are generally broken up by geography. So someone in the office might be in charge of the Northeast, the Southwest, the Southeast, right? So regional assignments, and those regional assignments often mean that whoever's in charge of that region is in charge of recruiting there, maybe giving presentations in that space, in that area, and then also reading the applications from that area. The goal is for that regional reader admissions officer to have a very good understanding of the schools, the curriculum, the rigor of their region. Now, of course, there's a lot of turnover in college admissions, and so that doesn't always happen, but that's the goal. So priority changes, enrollment changes, evaluation and voter sheet changes, seasonal reader assignments, and the regional assignments of what admissions officers will be reading which area, all generally happening before you press submit. Okay, what happens after you press submit, right? That's the more important part. That's what's happening right after you press submit. Everyone wants to know what's happening with my application. How quickly will they read it? When they're reading it, what will they care about? What types of decisions will they make? So let me walk you through what happens after you press submit. The first term you see there says credential. Any document that you submit, your letters of recommendation, a transcript, an essay, whatever it might be, if it's a separate document, we will refer to that in college admissions as a credential. Now, many of you know, students know, that credentials, like a teacher recommendation, they don't always arrive at the exact same time as the application, right? The application might be submitted earlier or after the credential. So when I say credential matching, for all of you who are worried about, my teacher sent a letter of rec before I submitted my app, or, now I'm submitting something new, will they attach it to my app? 99.9% of the time, they do a great job of matching the documents that came in before your app, and matching it to the apps that actually were submitted. Once you press submit on the app, you will be able to, usually about 7 days for each, depending on school, they will give you a portal. And in that portal, you can sign in and see all of the required pieces of the app. And if one of those required pieces is missing, it will usually indicate that. So if you're wondering if your documents have been connected, you can wait till you press submit and then check the portal, or you could call the school and ask. The second thing that's happening right after the applications are submitted is filters, right? The college admissions officers are using a variety of different filters to try and position the apps and read them in some level of order. So maybe I would filter the app by, let's just say for argument's sake, I say, let's take all the students who have scored below 1,400 on the SAT, who are male, who are computer science. Now, statistically at Cornell, for example, we know that students that have below that score typically don't get in, historically. That doesn't mean that no one gets in, but historically they don't. So that would be a filter. And that group of applicants that falls under that filter would be read differently. It's a perspective that the admissions officer or the seasonal reader enters with when they're starting to read that app. So certain readers will filter their apps to create certain types of groups of students so they can kind of read them together. And then the third thing that's happening right after you press submit is that usually if they have seasonal readers, this person or people are jumping in and they're doing like a more mechanical filter. So you could filter, of course, by a spreadsheet, right? You could filter by through software, but oftentimes they do a more mechanical filter by having the seasonal readers read the app, but kind of with a filtered lens. So they say to them, well, please read these 200 applications, but recognize historically, we have not admitted many students like this. So it's a filtered group then provided to the seasonal reader reviewer. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. What happens when your application's actually about to be read? So as I said earlier, we do, in almost every admissions office in the country, reads by geography. So the first thing the reader is going to do is they're going to say, okay, here's my region. Let's just say the Northeast. And now as the admissions officer, I have some autonomy to decide how I'm going to attack my region. Most admissions officers read by school group. Almost all of them read by school group. When I say school group, what I mean is that they will read all of the applicants from one high school together, right? They don't read, one high school Stuyvesant and then pull up another high school from Alabama, right? Because they're hard to compare a New York application to an Alabama application. So they read high schools together. That's what I mean when I refer to a school group. And so let's just say I'm managing the Northeast, and I might say, okay, the first thing I want to do as the admissions officer in my region is find out which of the school groups in my region, so these are all the main schools that send us apps, which ones are complete. When I say complete, what I mean is that when you press submit on, say, on January 1st, for example, it's very possible that the app is in, but your application is not complete, right? Your transcript might not have been submitted by your school yet, or maybe your guidance counselor didn't submit your rec, or a teacher didn't submit your rec. So that means that the app is submitted, but it is incomplete. The readers can't read school groups that have large percentages of the apps incomplete. So if I pull up a big high school like Stuyvesant in New York, and I say, well, 75% of the applications are incomplete, which is very typical a couple days after the deadline because the schools haven't sent everything yet, then I really can't read that, right? Because I'm not able to compare all the people from that specific school group to each other. So the first apps that are always read are school groups that are complete. And that's usually dependent upon how quick is the high school in sending in letters of rec, transcripts, etc. That's generally how it starts. In regards to the way they read the school group, the first thing they do is generally order it to the best of their ability, either by GPA or SAT, so they have some level of order when they're starting to read through the school group. And you'll also hear me use the term feeder school. A feeder school is just a large school group. So if a high school sends, say, 10 students to Cornell, that's not a feeder school, right? That's not a lot of students. But if a high school sends 100 applications to Cornell, that would become a feeder school. And feeder schools are generally read together. And there's attention, a lot of attention that's focused on a feeder school because historically, a lot of students from those types of schools come and are enrolling at whatever institution we're talking about. And then while the admissions officer is thinking about, okay, this is my region, this is how I'm going to attack which apps I read first, this is how I'm going to order my school group, then they're starting to think through what are the metrics and scales that have been provided to me, right? That's on the evaluation or voter sheet. And how do I think about the app as I'm reading through it to make sure that I'm analyzing the qualities and characteristics that would allow me to understand whether or not the student's scoring well or weak on the scale or metric that's being used. So this is an example of a voter sheet. This is a real voter sheet from Cornell. This was, I don't know if this is what they're exactly using right now. This was the voter sheet that was used when I was there. They had a version of this when I was there, and I edited it to make it this. So this is exactly what was used when I was managing the operation. I know it's hard to see, and I did, in the rest of this presentation, I did break this all out, and we'll go through it very clearly, each part of this voter sheet. But I just wanted you to get a sense just by glancing at what it is. And so you can see at the top, mostly demographic information, where the student goes to school. Are they first, you see some high level priorities at the top here: legacy, VIP, first gen, athlete, women in STEM. You see the GPA. You see over here some standardized test score. The student took a TOEFL score. So you see SAT, TOEFL. Back then, they also had SAT subject tests. You can see the subject test scores. Right here, you see kind of an interesting, this is the curriculum review. And a lot of people ask me all the time, what is the GPA that you need to get in? And I always say, I don't know, right? Because it depends on what high school we're talking about. You can see that really there's no such thing as a GPA that gets you in. A lot of the schools will literally chart your transcript. So you can see here, this is a chart of the transcript: English, math, social science, history, all the subjects on the left-hand side, the grades across the top, and then the grades that the student scored in each of those areas has been noted by the reader, and they noted the AP scores on the side. You could also see that it's noted right here, 100%, the voter sheet, that is, asks what percentage of students go to four-year colleges. That's the quality of the high school. You can see it says 100% here. We see a few comments here about the Common App essay, philosophical, thoughtful descriptions of math. Writing supplement noted that they talked about math in 3 separate ways. Excellent essay. This also noted a summer program, and that the recommendation said that it was one of the top 2 students in number theory and one of the strongest ever that the recommender had taught. You can see the scale there at the bottom. You can see academic preparedness, positive impact, and fit and interest. You can see some comments, a box here for comments about the scale, some general comments about the application as a whole, and then a statement here about what the decision is. And you can see for Cornell, we had written what is compelling / not compelling. That's what we wanted the readers to tell us. What is compelling or what is not compelling? And that should tell us why you made the decision. And then you see a wide variety of final decision options down here. You can see there's actually a bunch of them. This is in this spot here. You have accept PSP, accept recommended, accept required, postpone. These are all different decisions that a reader could have made. And we'll talk a little bit about what those different decisions look like. Okay, so what I did was I went through that voter sheet, and every part of it, I asked myself, does this have 0 impact on the decision? Does this have a small impact on the decision? Does this have a medium impact on the decision? Or does this have a big impact on the decision? The only thing I could find on the voter sheet that had 0 impact was the student's name. So your name has no impact. It doesn't matter what it is, it will not impact the decision. But pretty much everything else has some impact on the decision. Minor impact on the decision. Gender. Gender impacts the decision, of course. If you are a female applying to an engineering school, females are underrepresented, that would be impactful. If you're a male applying to a male-dominated school like Carnegie Mellon or MIT, gender will impact it. So generally, gender is not a huge impactor, but depending on where you're applying, it could be. State, where you come from, whether that's even if it's outside of the US, if you're an international candidate, that of course has a huge impact. What state you come from in the US has a significant impact, well, a minor impact, but an impact. And that would be basically that if you come from a large export state, right? So lots of students are leaving New Jersey to go to college. So none of the colleges and universities are struggling to find representation from the state of New Jersey. But not many students are leaving North Dakota to go to college. And so to that end, lots of top-tier colleges and universities will have a lack of representation from a student from North Dakota. So where you come from has an impact. Your date of birth. Your date of birth has an impact, especially if you are an international student applying from China. A lot of times we see that the students are a year older, and that will absolutely impact your admissions decision. If you are a year older than everyone else, and there's a good reason for that, you should probably contextualize it. If not, it might be a red flag for the reader. The alumni interview should have no impact in theory at highly selective schools because the interviews are officially non-evaluative. But it's almost impossible to ignore something that's really good or really bad. And so to that end, often an alumni interview has some minor impact depending on the quality of that interview. And then the final thing that I would note would be a visit. There are schools out there that certainly have that track demonstrated interest, right? That means that they're literally tracking how many times you went to an information session, visited the website, made a phone call to the school. There are schools out there that track all of that. The Ivy League and Ivy Plus schools generally do not. And usually whether you visited or not doesn't have too much of an impact because they're not really tracking demonstrated interest. But, as I was reading through and preparing for this presentation, and I was looking through the voter sheets, I had actually forgotten, because it's really not a huge impact on the decision, but I had forgotten that it really was on our voter sheet, had the student visited, yes or no. And even though that wasn't really something that we talked a lot about, as I was reading through the comments, I did note that some of the readers were noting that the student had visited or had not visited, even though it really wasn't a big part of our evaluation process. So visiting can, at certain schools, have an impact. It's something you want to at least think about. Medium impact. So these would be, these are going to actually impact the decision if for some reason it's not at a reasonable level. So SAT or ACT. Standardized tests, of course, used to have a big impact. I would have put it in the more significant category a couple years ago, but post-pandemic, SAT and ACT at certain schools has become significantly less important. So I would say medium impact. I highly encourage all of you who have not done this yet to prep for the SAT or an ACT. If you do well, you will have more options. If you don't do well, there are certainly more strong schools out there that are available than there ever were before. But I would still challenge students to at least take the test and keep as many options open as possible. AP scores, this does vary from institution to institution, college to college. I would say most of the admissions officers and colleges that I've come in contact with do value AP scores because they're just so easy for the reader to look at. 5 means something objectively across different high schools. And so I think most readers do use them. But I have come across some colleges and universities that kind of push back against the AP. So I put it down as a medium impact. I would say at Cornell, it's still a rather significant impact, but some schools it might be a little bit less. And then the quality of your high school. So you saw on the voter sheet, I noted that it asks what percentage of students are going to four-year schools. That is one of the indicators of quality of the high school. If you go to a high school that is super strong and sends lots of students to top-tier schools, maybe it's a feeder school, you start in an advantaged position. If you come from a school that sends nobody to a highly selective school, you start at a disadvantaged position. Now, neither of those positions are determinative, right? If you start in a great school, that doesn't mean you're getting in. And if you start in a weak school, that doesn't mean you can't get in. We've gotten many students from weaker high schools into top tier universities, sometimes by challenging the admissions officer to take them, by saying, hey, you haven't taken anybody from my school in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And sometimes that challenging works. Sometimes being at a really highly competitive high school can work against a student sometimes because the top of that class can be so competitive and it might make it harder in theory to get to a Harvard or a Princeton or a Yale. So quality of high school does have an impact, and it could hurt. It could be on both sides. If high quality or low quality, both could have some level of impact in the decision. And then we have big impact. Curriculum, right? So if you don't take a rigorous or highly competitive curriculum, you're not even in the conversation, right? So that's a big impact. You gotta challenge yourself if you want to go to a highly selective school. Grades. If you don't do well, obviously, in your schoolwork, you're not going to go to a highly selective school. So you're not in the conversation if you don't have that. Now, the thing about curriculum and grades is like, you have to take a challenging curriculum. You have to do well. But then we get to prospective major, right? This is a big impact. If you put down a highly competitive prospective major, it's going to be a lot harder to get in. And you put an easy one down, it's going to be a lot easier to get in. That's one of the few things that we can do outside of the quality of the work that we create in the essays, but one of the few things that we can change that can have a very significant impact on the decision. You can see the next one is ethnicity, right? We can't change ethnicity. We can't change your citizenship, right? Those are things that they're static, they will not change, but your prospective major can change. And that is a big impact on the decision. Ethnicity, as noted, is a big impact. It certainly always was a big impact. Post-affirmative action decision, it will be very interesting to see how ethnicity plays a role. I will tell you, the colleges and universities are not just going to give up, right? They value diversity, and they're going to try and figure out how to maintain that diversity. I think there's going to be a wide array of strategies that they employ to do that, and I have some ideas about what that might look like. Citizenship, big impactor. It is certainly significantly harder to apply to a top-tier school as an international student. So if you have citizenship or a green card, a completely different level of competitiveness, really, than applying as an international student. So just be aware of that. And the final part, big impact would be obviously disciplinary or criminal history. But obviously on the voter sheet, if you have a criminal history or you've had a significant discipline issue, that would have a huge impact on the decision. Okay, so those are all the different things that are being considered by the reader in that first read. And they are filling out the voter sheet. They're identifying where the rigor was, what the grades were, what the AP classes were, what was the quality of the research, etc. And when they're done with all of that, they're making a preliminary decision. Preliminary, not a final decision, a preliminary decision. So say I'm the first read, I read through it, I say, John looks like a good candidate. I'd like to admit John. I'm going to note preliminary, accept. That file then electronically gets sent to a second reader. The second reader is often a senior reader. This person has at least 3 years experience, usually 5 years plus experience. And if the first read took generally somewhere between 12 and 15 minutes, that's how long they're spending on that first read, which, as you can imagine, is not that easy because not only are you just reading, you're actually filling out a voter sheet, which is why at the highly selective schools, a lot of the readers will have the seasonal reader kind of fill that voter sheet out for them in advance so that they don't have to do that. But generally, the actual read is about 12 to 15 minutes long. The second read is somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes long. So all that stuff has already been filled out. There's context from the first reader. And now I can kind of move through that app a little more quickly. And I'm trying to determine, do I agree or disagree with that first read? If I agree, and it's pretty obvious, then I can move on rather quickly. If I disagree, then I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time digging to figure out what is it that they saw that I didn't see. If we come to the same conclusion, whether that's offer or waitlist or deny, that will become what we refer to in college admissions as a preliminary final decision. I know that sounds silly, a preliminary final, but it's preliminary because it's not final until those decisions are released out the door, right? So it's a preliminary final decision. And it's final because 2 people, first and second reader, both agreed. If they disagree, then one of 2 things will happen. Either they will send it to committee review. So that's usually a checkbox in the voter sheet that you can send to committee review. Or you can just have a conversation with your friend or colleague in the office. Now, you might think that most of them go to committee review, but that is definitely not the case. Most of the disagreements are resolved literally by a conversation. At lunch, let's get together and talk about the apps that we disagreed about. Let's schedule a meeting to talk about the apps that we disagreed about. The readers, the admissions officers know they're not allowed to take hundreds of files to committee. There's no time for that. So they're going to have to take the hundreds of disagreements, narrow them down through conversation, and identify the couple files that they would then like to bring to the full committee review. Now, in addition to the full committee, there are micro committees. So micro committees generally are formed based upon the priorities. So I said in the beginning that one of the first things the admissions office is doing after they admit the class, enroll the class, that is to look at what did we do? How many students do we have in each area? And how is that going to impact our priorities for next year? If the priority is new or super important, they often will create a micro committee around that priority. So for example, there might be an international committee. Lots of schools have a priority of increasing the international representation. So in order to do that, they will create an international committee. Those people will generally have a little more experience, have read international apps, and they're going to do a second read on the regional admissions officers' decisions, because since it's a priority, we feel more eyes need to be on that. Special Programs Committee, for example, at Cornell, when I was the director, we had just rolled out a new academic program called the Milstein Program. The Milstein Program was an interdisciplinary program designed to connect technology and the humanities. And they would, if you applied to this program, you would spend your summers at Cornell Tech. And it was not an honors program, but it functioned like one, because there was a faculty, I don't want to say a reviewer, because the admissions officer reviewed the applications, but the faculty mentor basically identified what they wanted in the Milstein applications, what types of students they were looking for. And so then we convened a committee to review the nominations of the readers. So if the readers said, I think this sounds like a great Milstein student, you know, they were a writer for the newspaper, and they were in coding club, right? So we have humanities, and we have technology. I think that's a good Milstein candidate. They would nominate them, and that would then go to the special program committee. A lot of your schools that are maybe a little bit less selective, that have scholarships, almost all of them have scholarship committees, right? So maybe the initial reader nominates you for a scholarship. I think this student's fantastic. We're never going to get them to come unless we give them a merit scholarship. I'm nominating them. And then that goes to a scholarship committee where they can kind of evaluate all of the nominees together and decide what level scholarship is appropriate. You note at the top of this list, I noted that they will often override regional admissions officers. And the reason for that is because they have more experience. There's more of them, right? In that first review, 1 and 2, there's only 2 people. Now in the committee, there might be 4, 5, or 6 people. And they have, in theory, more understanding, in-depth understanding of the priority that this group of individuals could fill for the university. And so sometimes the more generalized admissions reader doesn't really understand exactly how important it is to fill that specific special program. So that's why the micro committees are quite powerful. And one of the reasons that I'm so focused on certain aspects of our method and our process is because I know what these committees are going to do, right? There's even often micro committees for underrepresented academic programs where they'll go through and say, show me all the philosophy applicants. I want to make sure that we're not getting rid of any good ones just because the original reader didn't like it. We know as the humanities committee that we need more X. And so they have in theory, a more in-depth understanding of why they need to take this type of student. So micro committees are important. They aren't talked about very much, but they have a significant impact on decisions. And then we have the full committee, right? This is the one that you hear about a lot and is the subject of, movies and videos. And the truth is very, very, very few students end up in a full selection committee. Just imagine for a moment how inefficient it is to have, I told you that generally it takes 12 to 15 minutes to read an application, right? And they'd love to spend more time, of course, but if you take all the time you have to read and divide it by how many apps you have, it basically comes to 12 to 15 minutes. And so in a full committee, you are literally having 40 or more admissions officers or readers all staring at the same application, right? And that is really very inefficient as it relates to building a class. So the full selection committee functions, in my opinion, it's symbolic in many ways. Like a lot of admissions officers and deans and directors like to use the committee as a fallback for the decision, because almost no one's ever happy with the decisions, right? There's always somebody who's going to complain. somebody deserved to get in, a VIP, a legacy, somebody deserved something that didn't happen. And when those complaints come in, inevitably the admissions directors lean on the committee. They say, well, the committee said X. And, most of the time it's honestly not very true because the committee is seeing very, very, very few of the applications. I said less than 2%. When I did the math, it was less than 0.5% of the apps that were actually going to full committee. But, that might differ from school to school a little bit. Who's going to committee? Well, as I said, throughout the entire season of reading apps, you might have decided to send 100 apps to committee. And there's no way you're going to have 100 apps because you have to get up and present those apps to all of your colleagues. And, you're going to have an hour or so, right? So you're going to have to decide on maybe 4 or 5 apps, maybe less, that you are going to bring to committee. And so inevitably, it becomes the very complex, maybe the student transferred high schools multiple times and the grades were very different, or very interesting applications, unique things that basically can serve as learning foundations for the rest of the team. The stories that come to mind in selection committee, the selection committee, if I could describe it to you, it's honestly like for the students in the audience, like imagine you go to your cafeteria for lunch and you're all sitting around eating, and one of you got up and gave a presentation on why one of you should be admitted to school. Like that's literally what it's like, because it's, people are eating, they're working. It's this kind of very chaotic environment. And each person who's presenting is trying to kind of get the attention of the entire committee. And in essence, you're trying to get your friends to vote on your behalf, right? You're trying to make a strong case on behalf of your applicant and hopefully to sway the committee to see the decision the way you do. And so, one of the things that we do when we're building apps is we make sure that it's easy for the reader to share the story. If they can't figure out the story, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to make the best pitch, the best case, especially in 4 to 5 minutes. And so we want to lay that story out for them so that if you end up in a full committee situation, they know how to present you. The third note here, it says ESPN. As I was getting ready for this presentation, I was thinking through our full committee experiences. The one that stood out in my mind was a young man who he was on the football team in high school, and his high school was the subject of significant hazing. Like it became a big news story. And so it was picked up by the local media, and then ESPN picked it up, and it became a big ESPN story. So of course, this is, one of those interesting, complex applications. And this young man was like the center of this story. He was bullied or somehow hazed. I don't remember 100% the details, but I remember that. And the fourth thing that you see here is I say social media. And the reason I put social media is in that situation with the ESPN story, when that young man was brought to committee, you got 40-some people sitting there listening to the presentation about this person. They have the file, they have the transcript, the application all up in front of them. This is where the horror stories come from. So like you hear about, oh gosh, don't put anything online, social media wise, it could hurt you. 99% of the time, at least in college admissions, nobody's looking. As I said, 12 to 15 minutes, they do not have time to be going through your Instagram post to see what you've said. But if you go to full committee and 40 people are all sitting there looking at one app and they're all trying to impress each other and show off in front of their boss and their colleagues, this is where they will go through everything that they can find on you. So, some post you put on a forum a couple of years ago, if someone will find it if you go to full committee, because that's what they're doing. And not because it's really pertinent to the decision. It's really showing off and boredom. That's what happens. But it does happen. And it's important for you to recognize that you want to be thoughtful about what you put out there on social media, because in very rare instances, it can have a negative impact, when people really start digging. Okay, so we've talked about the first read. We've talked about the second read. We've talked about micro committees, and we've talked about the full committee, right? So those are all parts of the process. And I would say, maybe people don't know much about the micro committees, but generally the fact that 2 people are reading the app and that there's a committee is pretty well known in college admissions, right? People outside of the space, they know that's generally how college admissions work. But what I'm about to talk about next, which is the senior staff audit, this is not well known in college admissions. And I do feel I sound arrogant when I say this out loud, but this is the truth. When you look through a lot of different companies and they have college admissions officers who've worked for them, and you see, hey, there's an admissions counselor. This is an assistant director. This is an associate director. This is a senior associate director. There's all these different titles. The reason there's so many titles is because they don't pay very well, honestly. So they just keep giving promotions. But there's all these different titles. And it's important to note that all of those people that I just noted, all those different titles, they're all part of the process that I just explained. Read number 1, read number 2, micro committees, and full committee. What none of those people are part of is the audit. Just like, you might audit your financial records, they audit the class, the senior leadership. And so the first thing that's done is we look at what we did last year. We look at the priorities, right? What did we say we wanted to accomplish? And then we look at what has been done. When I say what has been done, this is like the 2-week period after all the apps have been read, right? So the admissions officers have read all of their apps. The decisions are not due yet to the students. And so it's usually about 2 weeks between all apps read and decisions must go out the door. In those 2 weeks, that's when that audit is happening. And this is generally done behind closed doors. When I say behind closed doors, the admissions officers are not part of this. Why are they not part of this? Because it doesn't make anyone feel good to do this. Imagine you read apps for the last 3 months, you poured your heart and soul into it. Then you made a preliminary decision. Then you had a conversation with your friend, your colleague about it. Then it went to a micro committee. Then it went to a full committee, right? All these pieces have happened. And then all of a sudden, we look at the audit and we find, we have too many computer science students. We don't have enough first generation students, whatever it is. There's a problem as it relates to the priorities versus the decisions. And now there's no time to go back and say, let's have this really nice organic process where we decide exactly how we're going to cut and how we're going to add. It ends up being clunky and done by spreadsheet a lot of the time. And so a lot of what happens is behind closed doors with 2 or 3 people in the room trying to make the final decisions to make sure that the decisions that were made represent the priorities of the school. The questions that are being asked: who do we cut, who do we add, and how do we do it? Now, how do we do it part, that varies depending on how much time you have and the level of experience you have on your admission staff. I would say on one end of the spectrum, it's literally done by 1 or 2 people by spreadsheet in an office by themselves, and then the admissions officers are made aware. On the other end of the spectrum, if it's done the right way, you might say, okay, we know what we need to do. Now we're going to give the regional admissions officers the autonomy to go into their region and make the decisions themselves about who they're cutting and who they're adding with the directions we gave as based on the priorities. Those are kind of 2 different ends of the spectrum. Sometimes it's done half and half, but in the end, the most important thing that's for you to recognize is that as an applicant, you might have got a yes from the preliminary read, a yes from the second read, a yes from the micro committee, a yes from the full committee, and you might still not get in, right? That's true. And on the flip side, you might have gotten a no from the preliminary read, a no from the second read, a no from the micro committee, and a no from the full committee, and you might still get in. It's very unlikely, but you might still get in. Now, I would say most of the time, the deans and directors are trying to make sure that the committee decisions are not being altered because there's something, there's a sanctity to those decisions. But sometimes they are altered when they need to be. And the more individual decisions, like, a finalized decision by 2 readers, those are changed often. And so really understanding what is valued by these schools, how the decisions are being made, it impacts my strategy a lot. I think that's why sometimes my presentations are rather complex because there are so many factors and I know what they are. And so it's really important for me, from my perspective, to make sure that our team and that our clients understand how each one of the decisions they make impact the final decision. So what are the final decisions? Well, you'd be surprised, right? Like a lot of times people think it's like offer or reject. There are a lot of final decisions out there, and they vary by school. Of course, offer and reject are the most common, and then you have waiting lists, right? So, if you're offered, you're accepted, obviously. If you're rejected, you're done, and you cannot reapply. you're waitlisted, you're going to wait a little longer, and they're going to have to make some decisions based on enrollment as to whether they need more people. And if they do, you might be one of them. If you're deferred, that means you applied early, and now you're going to be considered in a second round, usually regular decision, with a new group of applicants as your competition. Most people understand those. The ones that people don't really understand are the second one on the list. It says conditional accept. You might have heard of this before. Cornell, we called it PSP. I honestly don't remember what PSP stood for now. The acronyms are starting to slip from my mind. But PSP was basically a summer enrichment program. So students that the admissions officers really liked, there was something really strong about them. Maybe it was their academic area, maybe it was something personal, but there was something that made them believe they were not ready yet. They would get a conditional offer, and that conditional offer was you need to attend PSP program, you need to do reasonably well, get a certain grade in the class, and then you will be not offered, but you will automatically then start in the fall. That was what PSP was. And lots of schools have that. I know like even some state schools, for example, Penn State, my wife is a Penn State grad. Penn State will often say, if you want to start in main campus, it's actually quite difficult to get into Penn State as a freshman to main campus. And one of the decisions they will give you would be main campus, but conditional on summer program, which means you have to come out, do the summer program on the main campus, and then you can start in main campus. So you get a lot of variety of decisions with these conditional accepts. There's also offers called transfer option offers. At Cornell, they're well known for the transfer option. It used to be called the guaranteed transfer option. I was actually working at the first school I ever worked at. It was Moravian University, and the director of admissions at Moravian University was the chair of the Good Practices Committee for NACAC, which is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors. And I still remember when he brought up that Cornell was going to be, that he had to call the director of admissions at Cornell about them not meeting the standards of good practice because they had this thing called the guaranteed transfer. And what that meant was that students were getting, they were applying to all these schools, and they were getting a guaranteed transfer to Cornell. That meant they couldn't start at Cornell. They had to go somewhere else. And so in essence, all these other schools were getting upset that students were going for one semester or 1 year, depending on the option, to, let's just say, Lehigh, and then transferring to Cornell, and it was guaranteed. And so people complained about that in the college admissions realm. And then Cornell had to change the guaranteed transfer to the transfer option. But it really does function still much like a guaranteed transfer when the students, if they get it and they meet the requirements. And some schools also have a spring semester accept. At Cornell, we used to call this a January freshman, Jan term. This basically meant that students, they were asked on the app, would you be willing to start in January? A lot of schools, not a lot, I'd say, a handful of schools ask this. And if you said yes, it enhanced your chances of getting in. If you said no, it decreased your chances of getting in a little bit. Of course, the downside of this was if you said yes, they also increased your chances of them just starting you in the spring, right? So they might have, maybe you were going to get in the fall, they might have said yes to you in the fall, but you said, I'm willing to start in the spring. And the reader says, you know what, this student's really good, and I don't have many good students that want to start in the spring. Let's just start this student in the spring. So I always tell my clients, make sure that if you see any unique questions on the supplement, like would you be willing to start in January? Or do you want to start abroad for the first semester, that you check with us, because those types of questions definitely do impact your chances of getting in. And it might impact your chances of starting when you want to start. Okay, so what happens after decisions are released? So as you know, once you're offered admission, the first thing you want to do is investigate, decide, right? Like, is this school, do I want to go to it? Yes or no? And in order to do that, the colleges and universities will put on these accepted student events. We call them yield events, right? And they're yield events because they're trying to yield, right, to get the students to enroll, the ones that they've just accepted. And so that's when kind of the dog and pony show is brought out. That's when you will have an opportunity to talk to faculty members and talk to current students and understand the special programs, maybe even negotiate your financial aid package or scholarships. At a place like, Ivy League schools, there's no scholarships, but is our need-based financial aid packages being negotiated? Yes, they are. So that's what's happening during that period of time. The colleges are trying to yield the students, get them to enroll, and the students are trying to obviously decide whether or not they actually want to enroll. Now, the admissions officers, you can see number 2 there, deposits versus target review. I would say starting April 1st, the director of admissions every single day is looking at how many total enrollment deposits do we have, and how does that compare to how many enrollment deposits did we have last year on the same date? And if they're running with more deposits, then they're likely not to go to the wait list. And if they're running less deposits, they're likely to go to the wait list. Generally speaking, none of the admissions directors really have enough information to really decide much before April 15th. And the reason for that is because National Candidates Reply Date, the date that every single college in the country requires you to decide whether you're going by, is May 1st. And most students decide very close to that deadline. Like, they don't decide months in advance. They decide, 10 days, 7 days, 3 days before the deadline. And so because of that, most of the colleges and universities have no clue whether they're going to the wait list until at least April 15th. And I would say most of the time it's May 1st. They really don't know until, April 30th, May 1st, May 2nd, until those deposits come in, and they can then review how many did they expect, where are they at, and that informs obviously how aggressive they are if they go to the wait list. Generally, wait list decisions will start May 1st or shortly thereafter, and generally they're trying to finish it up by June 1st. May is the month, but there are certainly some schools that go later than that. I've certainly seen schools go into July and August for the wait list. That's atypical for an Ivy League school. But for the schools that are a little lower, it is somewhat typical. And the reason for that is because it's kind of like a trickle down, right? So if Harvard goes to the wait list, it impacts Cornell. Cornell then has to go to the wait list, it impacts Carnegie Mellon. Carnegie Mellon goes to the wait list, it impacts Lehigh. Lehigh goes to the wait list, it impacts Penn State, right? So it kind of trickles down, and it takes longer for the less selective schools to get to that point where they know that they have to go to the wait list. And so that's generally how it happens. Okay, so if any of you are in the audience have already been deferred or waitlisted, I wanted to give you just a little bit of insight into the things that help and don't help. We'll start with the things that don't help. Popular prospective majors, right? You hear me talk about prospective majors a lot. That's because it's one of the few things that, in theory, you can change, and it has a huge impact. It has a huge impact on the initial decision, and it has a huge impact on whether you actually were to get off the wait list. If you are on the waiting list and you were a computer science prospective major, or you were biology pre-med prospective major, you're probably not getting off the wait list. And it's nothing to do with you. They don't need any more people like you. And because of that, they're not going to go out of their way to take students off the wait list that have those academic interests. More likely, they're literally looking at what are we missing in our class right now? And does the wait list offer any of those people? And even if they're academically a little weaker, to fill an enrollment hole, to say we have enough of these types of people, very likely that they would make those types of offers. So popular prospective majors, if you're in one of those areas, not going to help you. If you have financial need, so maybe you applied for financial aid. If you applied for financial aid, the initial decision, whether we're talking about the first read, second read, committee review, all of those decisions, even the audit, none of those were impacted by your financial need at Ivy League or Ivy-like institutions, because they're need blind. But even for the need blind schools, if you have financial need and you were waitlisted, it's very possible that they pull the list of students that applied for aid or have financial need and discount them from waitlist consideration, because in many instances, they've already used their financial aid budget on the students that were offered, and they don't really have additional financial aid dollars available to give to waitlisted students. So if you applied for financial aid and you had financial need, you very likely are not getting off the wait list. If you applied for financial aid and you did not have financial need, and this is actually relatively typical. My parents did this. When I applied to college, my parents did pay for college. I was fortunate in that regard. But my mom and dad said, John, we would like to make sure that you feel vested in your own education. So we're going to apply for financial aid because we had heard that there is a loan called the Stafford loan. It's a student loan. And we're going to take that student loan out for you. It's not that much. I think it was like $5,000, if I remember correctly. And that is going to be for you, John, so that you know that there's an investment on your side. Well, as I look at what my mom and dad did, it didn't end up impacting me negatively at the time, but it could have, because applying for financial aid, right, just applying, if the admissions officer, if let's just say the director of admissions says, okay, guys, we've got to go to the wait list. As you know, we don't have any aid dollars available anymore. A lot of admissions officers will just run a report of all the students who never applied for aid, right? It's a second step to say, run a report of all the students who applied for aid but didn't have any need. That's another level of complexity. And a lot of the admissions officers won't do it because it's just not necessary. So if you applied for aid and you are no need, in theory, the college would want you, but likely you're going to get filtered because they think you applied for aid and that's enough for them just to move on to someone else. So if you applied for aid and you don't have financial need, I would highly encourage you to reach out to the school and let them know. And maybe they can withdraw your aid application, and maybe that shows up when they're running reports. But it's also possible that they don't withdraw your aid application. They say, oh, okay, you're no need, and they just kind of don't do anything about it. And then in theory, the fact that you applied for aid may have a negative impact on you. We've talked about or many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the letter, right, that you might send after you've been waitlisted, indicating that you have continued interest. I would say updates on old material are not going to help, right? So talking about things that were already in the app, that's not going to move the needle. And then the fourth thing that I would note would be over-the-top enthusiasm. I've experienced this with my own clients, and I've experienced it when I was working in college admissions, where, a student or a family will say, and I respect it. They really want to differentiate themselves. And I respect that, but they kind of take it to the next level. I had a student when we were at Lehigh. I remember very clearly. They decided to get M&Ms with the Lehigh logo brand on it, and they delivered. I'm talking tubs and tubs and tubs of these M&Ms to the Lehigh admissions office, and it was cute until there were so many tubs. We had to lug all these M&Ms out, and at first people I thought it was going to move the needle positively because I thought people kind of liked it. But then all of a sudden the tide changed and everyone's kind of noting the privilege of the student to drop off all this stuff. And again, you just don't know how that's going to be perceived. I had no issue with the Lehigh M&Ms, but some of the people did. And so to that end, I would suggest that you don't go over the top in your enthusiasm. These things do help. So what does help, right? Nobody wants to hear about what doesn't help. What does help? Well, something new helps, right? So anything that has happened post submission, if it's new, it's something you might want to think about adding to your letter. More important than what's in your letter, honestly, what's in it probably is not that important. What's more important is when it arrives. Imagine for a moment that you get your decision. It's March 2nd, right? And you get your decision, and you are really upset that you were waitlisted. So you sit down that night, you write up a letter, and you send it off, and they get it March 5th. Well, the reader is not thinking about the waitlist until at least April 15th, as I noted, more likely May 1st. So that letter that you sent, it's going to get lost in the pile of all the other letters that are going to be coming. And so well-timed letters, right? You want to be top of mind right when they're about to make a decision. That's really what we're focused on. If you happen to put an unpopular prospective major down, then you have a significant advantage. If you did not put down financial need, you have an advantage. If your guidance counselor is willing to pick up the phone and call, a letter may be a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of benefit. But more importantly, if the counselor is willing to pick up the phone and call on your behalf, that can move the needle. Now, I have many clients that say to me, John, I spoke to my counselor, and they told me that this whole thing you're talking about with counselor calls, it's not real. Colleges don't do it. They don't do it. I'm telling you that they are lying, right? When I say they're lying, maybe they're just uninformed. I don't know, but they're definitely not correct. Counselor calls happen. Does it happen with every college and university? Not every single one. It's hard to get Cornell on the phone, honestly, because of the structure of Cornell. You might be able to get the admissions office for the university on the phone, but those aren't the people who make the decisions. It's the college admissions office that makes the decisions. And getting them on the phone is a lot harder. Getting Harvard on the phone, it's difficult. But the point is that there are a lot of very highly selective schools out there that do pick up the phone. And there are lots of articles out there from guidance counselors in higher ed, in the Journal of Higher Ed, that talk about these counselor calls. So be aware of them. You don't want to be pushy because that can hurt you in another way. But we talk through with our team, how do we approach the idea of a counselor call? How do we talk to a counselor about it? And then what would the content of that counselor call be? That can move the needle. Influential people, I will say at this stage, it's possible an influential person can move the needle. Even someone that maybe wouldn't have been able to move the needle at the initial decision point, because we're dealing with a significantly smaller group, influential people may have some impact on a waitlist decision. So, that's when a local governmental official, when they make a phone call on someone's behalf, sometimes for a waitlisted student, that can impact it. The biggest impactor is honestly luck. That's really the truth, because you're talking about thousands of apps and a few spaces, and they're all making those decisions in a couple of days. And so it's a combination of luck and getting your content in front of the right people at the right time to typically get off the wait list. Hopefully that provides a little bit of insight. Getting off the wait list is not exactly scientific. It's something that people reach out to us all the time for help on it. I never take clients on specifically to get them off the wait list because there's only so much you can really do, but these are some of the things that can move that needle. Okay, I know I've talked for a little while here. Admissions trends, and I'm just going to briefly touch on these because, as Sophia noted, we'll be doing presentations on some of these moving forward. Transfers, for example, is the next presentation I'll be doing, and hopefully give you some in-depth insight. Few things that have happened in the past year or two that have really impacted college admissions. First is the affirmative action decision. In short, the colleges cannot choose underrepresented minorities in the way they used to. That will impact the selection process. The biggest impact that I have seen this year has been that many of the colleges and universities have added diversity supplemental essay questions. And I think that's just fantastic for me and my team and for my students. Because in years past, whether or not you were diverse or add to the diversity of the school was based upon just the color of your skin, checkmark box, right? Now they have to make a qualitative assessment about your understanding of diversity and the value of diversity. And so that allows us to weigh in on the conversation. And I think that that's a good opportunity for our clients to show that they can add to the diversity of the school without necessarily fitting the checkmark box that they may be looking for. Chatgpt has certainly changed the dynamic as well, in that certainly the essay, the authenticity of the essay now is starting to be called into question. And I think what you're going to find is that in order to feel more confident in to believe what they're seeing, you're going to see way more video portfolios and interviews. We've already seen it. University of Chicago, optional video portfolio, Brown video portfolio. I think you're going to start to see it more significantly and more required evaluative interviews in the future. So as I've told my team and my clients, maybe a student's going to be at a swim team, competition this week. Maybe somebody else is going to be at debate. Somebody else is going to be, in a robotics competition. Maybe in years past, you wouldn't have thought about videotaping yourself, but now you should. Because video portfolios, if you're going to want to do voiceovers and you're going to want content to pull from, and so you're going to want to think through strategically early on, how can I start to build some content that would allow me to have a strong portfolio and possibly interview down the road. We've seen significant impact on the early rounds, and I think that's really mostly impacted by the affirmative action decision. Basically, the affirmative action decision was a decision against privilege, right? Privilege. And so when we talk about privilege, what is considered privileged in college admissions? VIP, legacy, early decision, right? Those are all kind of privileged aspects of college admission. And so what we've seen is push back against privilege. And that means that the state of New York, for example, has said, we might get rid of legacy admissions. We might get rid of early decision. UVA just came out, I think it was today, I saw the article today, saying we are no longer considering legacy in our decision-making. So legacy and early decision, things that support or provide access for privileged people, those are starting to get pushed back on. Now, let me just say that even though I've told my team and my clients that we should expect a longer process, that we should expect less students get in early because of the distribution of offers, I think it's important to note that that doesn't mean that different types of students are going to get in totally. I really do believe the same types of students will be admitted. These are businesses, right? These colleges are businesses. They need these types of students. But what they're going to do is they're going to play games with the way they accept them and the enrollment distribution. And so I'm confident that we will still see similar success rates, but you're going to see them drawn out more. Some of them are going to get in early. Some of them are going to get deferred into regular. Some of them are even going to be waitlisted. But you're still going to see the same final decisions when it's all said and done. And then the final thing that I think is important to note is transfer opportunities. There is a lot of flux in admissions right now. All these different things with standardized tests and diversity, and there's just a lot going on. And so that means that there's going to be more enrollment holes, and that means there's more opportunity in the transfer admission space. Okay, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I know I talk too much too often. Hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. A lot of information I don't even know about. So it's great. Thank you very much. That's a lot of work. And we do see a lot of questions. Some of them send it to everyone, and some of them are sending to the host and panelists. So I'm just going to go through. I saw some of the good questions. So do you want to, drink a cup of water, and then we go through them. And also, by the way, audience, if you wanted to have a personal voice over, talk to John directly, you can raise your hand, and then I will unmute you and then give you opportunity to ask a question directly to John. Okay, by the way, also chat box, I'm trying to do as much as I can. Some of the question may not be answered. I will pick the one I think it's most beneficial for most people. Okay, a lot of people asking, is this presentation going to be have a recording? Yes, we will. If you don't know how to get to the IvyCompass WeChat group, please also put on the WeChat, and Allison and me will bring you to our WeChat group. And once we have about 1 week of editing, we will be putting this presentation recording into our WeChat group, so you can listen over again, because I know there's a lot of information I even needed to listening twice and 3 times. Okay. The one question coming in is, John, on those voter sheets, that VIP, what is a VIP in the sheets? What that is, a donor or celebrity? What that belong to?
I would say mostly donors. Maybe a celebrity, maybe, but I would say mostly it's just donations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another question is, it seems that Cornell now only provides a virtual summer program. Do you recommend those who consider Cornell as the ED school take the summer program? That's often asking, a lot of people asking for that, meaning like, is that Cornell program will be, okay, hold on 1 second. The chat box. Hold on a second. Yeah, because Allison put the screen on, kind of taking off my. Basically, the first question is, do you recommending the person taking Cornell summer program? Now, summer program is like virtual, not in person.
I guess what I would say is that, I always tell all my clients, what we want to do is we want to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the summer program? If the purpose of the summer program is to show intellectual interest in an area, then I think it's a great idea, and Cornell does a great job. If the purpose of the summer program, from your perspective, is to show achievement, like, hey, look, I got into this summer program, I don't think summer programs do that. Even the very selective ones, there are some selective ones out there, and the college universities, it's always kind of a chicken or the egg conversation, right? Is it the program that got them in, or the type of student who applies to the program? But I generally do not believe that summer programs show achievement. So we use that as a foundational experience early in their career, 9th or 10th grade, just to get a progressive step. But I don't think it's super valuable.
Okay, excellent. Okay, before we answer the next question, I just wanted to thank you, Allison, to put the screen on. If you think your child deserves an opportunity to have a conversation with John, then you scan the barcode on the left-hand side. Our company has a very, very unique proposition, is give you that opportunity to talk to your consultant before you're considering signing the contract. So you know who you're dealing with, who you're working with, all the way until the application and the season. So if you want to have that inquiry meeting, please scan the barcode on the left-hand side. That will, me and Allison will follow up after this presentation to make sure, answer your questions, understanding your child situation, and then providing that opportunity to connecting with John to answer of your personal and student questions. And if you're not ready yet, you just wanted to pondering, shopping around and think about it, then you can scan the barcode on the right-hand side. Then we will bring you into our IvyCompass community. And then you can be in that group, listening to multiple hour presentation like today. We're going to bring you quality presentation every single month, and also watching some of the article we'll prepare for you. Oh, okay, John, let me go back to the second question is, can you indicate the minimum SAT score for those who are considering the math major?
For math major, the most important thing would be what class you're taking in senior year, definitely. But I would say that it depends on the school we're talking about. But we're talking about Cornell, I guess. I mean, I would say you definitely need at least 700 to even be in the conversation. But I would say most of the math majors are well over 750, and it's not atypical to see students with 760, 780, 800 in math. So of course that depends on what school we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mikey is asking, do bad grades of student in the first year of Ivy University affect the chance of admission of the student from the same high school in the coming years?
That's a good question. The short answer is, I mean, yes, a tiny bit. There are some admissions officers out there, especially the experienced ones, that do more stuff. For example, at Cornell, many of the admissions readers were also academic advisors, right? So they would see like, oh, this is a student I admitted, and now I have this student as an advisor, and I see that they're not doing well. And that would inform their decisions about the high school later on. I would say that that's not typical, honestly. Cornell had a unique structure. Most of the admissions officers would not have access to the freshman year grades most of the time.
Okay. Okay, next question also I think very good from TJ. How much input do a faculty members providing for the admission decision?
Good question. So for music and art, usually faculty are involved in that, and because of the uniqueness of the area, and their recommendations are usually quite impactful. For every other program, unless it's like a special program, like I had mentioned in my presentation, for all the other majors, faculty are generally not involved. Cornell was one of the very few schools in the entire country that had faculty as part of the review process. And the honest truth is, I got rid of it when I was there because it was too cumbersome to have all these faculty members managing it. So very atypical outside of art and music.
Excellent. I really like next question as well, coming from iPhone. What are the most competitive majors, and which one are rapidly increasing in the popularity?
Good question. One of the differences that between my approach and a lot of the other consultants' approaches, a lot of the consultants talk about their authentic self. Let's show the authentic version of the student. And I always think to myself that that's not a great idea, mostly because either the student doesn't know what their authentic self is, or the authentic self they're referring to is an academic area, and it's a popular academic area. And that's why that's why they're interested in it. So we focus on strategy. The popular areas are the ones that probably you're thinking about right now, that your children are interested in, that your friends are interested in: biology, computer science, right? Public health has become significantly bigger. Psychology is very popular. It's not highly competitive, but very popular. When you talk about the engineering areas, you talk about electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, those are super popular as compared to, say, civil engineering. So we're always trying to think through what are the popular areas, and then what are the less popular areas, and how can we build a story in the less popular area that still allows the student to have access to what they actually want to study when they get there.
Excellent. John, on that subject, actually, I would like you to maybe present or speak more on that, because even during the process of you coaching students, we found many parents are very scared, very much scared, because they don't understand the difference of prospective major in high school and what's the major they actually are going to be landing on in colleges. Can you just talk maybe more to emphasize, to help our parents and community understand what is prospective major, why it's okay? Because next question is in that related. So can you talk a little bit more on that? Because I feel they're all confused and scared.
Yeah, understood. So the prospective major, when I say prospective, it's prospective because you officially declare your major second semester of your sophomore year of college. That's typically. Now, if you go to an engineering college, it might be a little earlier than that. But at most universities, second semester of your sophomore year of college is when you declare. So if you put down on your application biology, that's what we refer to as prospective because you haven't declared it yet. Now, does a prospective major matter? If you haven't declared it, why does it matter? Well, it matters because the admissions officers and the readers are very hyper aware of how many apps they're seeing of different types of students. So if they see bio, right? They start to think, wow, there's a lot of bio students, and I really need to spend a lot of time differentiating each one of them and seeing which one's adding what. If they pull up a, let's just say Greek literature application, and they think like, wow, I haven't read a Greek literature application in, a week, then it's a different lens. Like, wow, unless there's something terrible about this student, I might be intrigued to admit that student. So Greek literature is obviously an extreme example of an unpopular area, but a prospective major that is unpopular, that means the admissions officer is going to want to give you an offer. And if the prospective major is very popular, the admissions officer is not going to want to give you an offer because there's so many of them. Now, when you get there, say I put down Greek literature, or say I put down computer science. John put down computer science, Sophia put down Greek literature. Now we go to our advisor, our first week of school, we say, hi, I put down Greek literature, Sophia put down computer science, we've changed our minds. That would be fine, as long as how you changed your mind, if the new major that you're interested in exists in the same college type. So if you apply to arts and sciences, that's at Cornell, and you put down Greek literature, and now you want to be computer science, no problem. Because in arts and sciences, computer science exists, and you can declare that. But if you put down economics in arts and sciences, which is a major there, and then decided you want finance is not a major in arts and sciences, that's in the business college only. That, even though economics and finance aren't that different, that's not going to happen because now you have to transfer colleges. And if you have to transfer colleges, it's a re-application review process. And the engineering colleges and business colleges are often, they're course sequenced and they're smaller. And so transferring in and out of those schools are very difficult to do. So what you want to do and what we do for our team is we make sure we understand the student's long-term goal, then we figure out the most strategic pathway to get them in and ensure that that long-term goal is still intact. If, you could make a mistake, right? If you don't know what you're doing and you say, well, this is an easy way to get in, but if it doesn't give you access to what you want to do long-term, then you kind of wasted your time. And a good example of that would be, we had a young man who was applying as a communication student, and we thought we had a very good communication story. That young man wanted to go to medical school and he wanted to study biology. When he applied to Cornell, it worked because communications was in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. They also had a bio major. When the student applied to Penn, it worked. Even though they don't call it communications, they call it linguistics. And that was in the College of Arts and Sciences, and thus he could still declare biology. But when he applied to USC, USC had its own college for communications, and that did not have biology in it. And so if we would have put him in there, he would not have been able to actually declare bio. So we had to make a change in order to make sure that we had the best story and still provide him accessibility. So it's important to understand this and to look at each school you apply to ensure that what you're applying to exists in the same area as what you want to do long-term if you're using that strategy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, next one is related. So I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this because this is really a big issue for our community. Coming from Roger, still asking, is it easy to transfer major after being admitted to Cornell, let's say from physics to AI or computer science?
So that would be an example where it gets complicated because computer science, for example, is a major that exists in the Arts and Sciences College and in the Engineering College. So if you were in the Arts and Sciences College as computer science, I think what was the question again? Computer science and physics? Is that what it was?
Yes, physics to AI or computer science from physics.
So from physics. So physics is in the Arts and Sciences College. And computer science is a major also in the Arts and Sciences College. So very easy to go from physics to computer science. What would be hard to do would be to go from physics to computer engineering, because that would be in the engineering college, and that would be a transfer.
Thank you, John. This one, I think from Jen Chen, your question being answered, right? By, aid or something. I think John talked about that, so I'm going to skip that. Okay, this one is coming from, I think, Emphasis. Can you comment on the issue of yield protection or Tufts syndrome in which colleges reject overqualified applicants?
Yeah, I mean, the honest truth is that was a very big part of what I did at Lehigh. I created a yield algorithm that was focused on understanding. This is we used to call him a high flying student, right? So an overqualified student, a high flyer. Now, of course, Lehigh wants high flyers, but if you admit all these high flyers that aren't going to come, then your admit rate goes up. And then those high flyers start to not apply at all because they think your school is not overly selective. So it is a game that needs to be played. And, when I was doing it at Lehigh, we would look for the intersection of high flyer versus some level of engagement. That's why that demonstrated interest plays a big role at a place like Lehigh. And if you showed some level of interest and you were a high flyer, of course, we're going to admit that student and take a chance. If the student's a high flyer and shows no interest, then it's a lot easier to waitlist the student. And then if they come to you, right, saying, hey, I send a letter of interest, then maybe they get off the wait list, but we don't want to waste a bunch of offers on students that are typically not going to enroll. So yield protection is definitely a thing. I think the way you combat that, the way we combat it, is we do a really good job on the supplemental essays, right? Like Lehigh has supplemental essays that are, there's 3 of them, I think. And one of them is about Lehigh and explaining kind of what the connective tissue is. The thing you have to understand is that the schools that are your backups, right? Maybe Lehigh is a backup for a lot of students that are applying to Ivy League schools. The colleges know that they're the backup, right? Like they know that. We get these, it's called a win-loss report. So College Board, for example, will give you a win-loss report. It'll say, out of the 100 students who were admitted to Lehigh and Cornell, 2 of them chose Lehigh. Like you get those reports. Out of the 100 students who were admitted to Harvard and Cornell, 20 of them chose Cornell. And so the colleges are hyper aware of where they are in the food chain. And so if they think that they're in a certain area of the food chain and that you look like you want to go above the food chain, and maybe there's even things in the app that make the reader think you are, maybe your parents went to Penn or something, then it really makes the reader think that they're wasting an offer. Your job is to make them believe they're not wasting an offer. And that requires time and energy, attention to the supplemental essays.
Thank you. That's why, in this case, such a complicated case, they need a coach like you to really tell them what to do, to make some impact. Okay, I know there's a 2-person raise a hand. Just wait for me a little bit, okay, because I want to go through some really good questions and then, I will get to you, okay? Just give me a second. The next question also very good.
Sophia, I just want to add one thing to this because it made me think of this. When I was at Lehigh, I used to be in charge of calling all the alumni whose children didn't get in. And so I'd have all these terrible conversations. And I still remember one of the alumni who said, John, just so you know, Lehigh was the backup school. She said that on the phone, the mom. It was the backup school. And he just got admitted to Penn. So I just want you to know, John, that you guys at Lehigh have no clue what you're doing, right? That's what she said. And I said to her, just so you know, and I said this nicely, of course, but we knew we were the backup. That's why we waitlisted you, right? We thought you might get into Cornell or Penn or a school like that. So it's important to recognize, we're on the same page. You really got, and that's an alumni's kid. They knew Lehigh very well, but we didn't believe that they cared about Lehigh. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question, same your background. For the same major, does CAS have higher rate of acceptance than CALS because CALS is subsidized? That's Cornell.
Right. The acceptance rate for CALS, C-A-L-S, is higher than the acceptance rate for arts and sciences. The reason for that is a wide variety of reasons. One would be that they get way less applications because of the specificity of that college. Agriculture and life sciences is more specific, obviously. And as noted, it's a contract college, which means that 50% of the students that are enrolled must come from New York State, which immediately kind of cuts down on the universe of people. So yes, the admit rate is higher in CALS than it is in arts and sciences. The thing you have to understand that these specialty colleges like CALS, ILR, human ecology, they are specialty and they care, or architecture and engineering. Those specialty colleges care about fit, even more than the quality of the student. I mean, of course, you have to be very strong quality, but they are hyper-focused on fit. So if you know exactly what they want in CALS or ILR or human ecology, you have a huge advantage. And if you don't know what they want, or you just haven't spent, you don't understand the space, you're a great student, but you don't really get it, you don't want to apply to one of those specialty colleges because they are trying to figure out if you know what they are. Arts and sciences isn't trying to figure out whether you know what they are. It's a broad college, but CALS definitely is. So easier to get in if you know what you're doing.
Okay. I also have somebody asking if the child during the high school got a detention, is that going to be affecting their admission and applying for colleges?
Only if the school was aware of it. That would not show up on the transcript. I've never seen that on a transcript before. I think, is it possible that shows up from the guidance counselor? Like, do they note that? If they note that in your letter, it definitely is lowering your chances because I haven't seen that ever in my life. And so it would feel like the guidance counselor was trying to make you sound bad. And honestly, because the letters are all like pretty good, basically, like if you don't sound amazing, then it's bad, basically, right? So yes, if they were aware that you got detention, it would have a negative impact. Now, if I knew one of my clients had detention and the school was going to be aware of it, I think there are things you could do to mitigate it. It's depending on what you got detention for. But yeah, it would be a negative thing.
Okay, next one is, what is the chance of student defer during the early action round be accepted during the regular round? Which you have case, I know you do.
Yeah, it really depends on what we're talking about. Like, so if a student is deferred from ED, I would say they do not have a very good chance. In most years, they did not have a really good chance being deferred ED. In most years, being deferred EA, you still had a reasonable chance. ED generally meant that you had a significantly better chance of getting an ED than RD. So if you were deferred in the RD group, it usually was for one of two reasons. Either it was a courtesy deferral, like, he's a nice kid, a good school, we're going to courtesy defer, or they literally wanted to know something about you. Like, you know what, the most rigorous part of the student's curriculum is in 12th grade. I'd like to see their first semester grades. That would be a reason for a deferral. But those were more rare. So if you're deferred ED, I'd say your chances generally were not that good. This year, when we saw way more deferrals in ED, I expect that you will see more offers in ED than we've ever seen before. So yes, in ED or EA deferral is still viable, less so in ED than EA, but more so this year in ED available than ever before.
Thank you. There's so many good questions. I think our community getting really, really very smart on this whole process. Thank you too for the past 2 years. Give us so much valuable information, inside information. Our parents getting really smarter, asking great questions. This one, the next two, I really like it. What major are considered unpopular, as you mentioned?
Unpopular. Well, I would say, when you think about kind of the distribution of academic areas, you have STEM, you have social science, you have humanities. And so generally speaking, STEM is more popular, the most popular, humanities is the least popular. STEM is the most competitive, humanities is the least competitive, and social science is right in the middle. Now, you could break it down and start to look at the majors underneath it, of course. Like, in the humanities, is English more popular than Greek literature? Yes, right? They're both humanities, but English is going to be more popular. I use examples a lot all the time. I talk about anthropology all the time. But what we're doing really is not saying, well, everyone has to be an anthropology major. What we're saying is, within the context of the area that they're talking about, what's the least competitive way we can do it? So, for example, I have a young man right now, current client. I had my first meeting with him today. He's very smart. He's top of the class. He wants to study computer science. He has a lot of computer science experience, and he's going to apply to the engineering college. Now, 2 of his projects are very community focused, and I think he could make the case for civil engineering. So it makes competitive sense, even though civil engineering isn't easy, right? But it's easier than computer science, and it exists in the engineering college. So what we're doing is focusing on what is the most strategic route for this student, not here's the most strategic group for all students. But I would say generally the humanities, anthropology, literature, classics, those are like the quintessential easy ones. There are also like at Cornell, entomology and agriculture. Those are also, very easy because of the specificity.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The next one I really like as well. How important are application essays?
Well, in the United States, at the highly selective schools, they engage in what we refer to as holistic review, right? Holistic review, I think a lot of people think that means you need to be well-rounded. That's not what it means. Holistic review means that they're going to look at how you spend your time and your energy outside of the classroom. That's really what it means. And so as it relates to your grades and your standardized test, those are bars of entry, right? If you're going to apply to top tier schools, like if you don't have that, they're barely even reading your app. You might get filtered, right? Or you might be read by a seasonal reader. Once you're in the conversation, because you have the quantitative metrics, I have the GPA, I have the SAT, I've taken the rigorous curriculum, then the decision rises and falls on the story, the narrative that you're providing. So those essays are very impactful right now. I think that they will maintain their being very impactful for the next year or 2, maybe 3. And then I think you're going to start to see more impact on interviews and video portfolios as the AI starts to make the readers question what they're seeing.
Thank you. There's one parent asking about transfer, so I'm not able to go back to the last page. Allison, if you wanted to go back to last page a little bit, I wanted to emphasize on February the 17th. It's also Saturday, 9 o'clock. John is going to have a presentation only on transfer. So I know there's parents asking for it. If you want asking for more transfer information, coming to this presentation, okay?